Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another Ontario election update. Before I begin, I'd like to remind everyone in a pinned comment on this video there is a election poll I'm running for the Ontario election. Make sure you go fill it out, send it to your friends and family, all that kind of stuff. And I would also like to shout out channel members. Really appreciate the support you guys give the channel, and you make a lot of this possible. But with no further ado, let us begin. So, I would say for this particular election, we might be approaching the high point for Ford. It would be remarkable if he manages to do better than this. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be very remarkable to me. Because what we're seeing here is the NDP is just collapsing. They have lost almost all of the north. They've lost almost all of the south, just holding out in London, Fanshawe, and Hamilton Centre. They're down in just 3 ridings in Toronto itself and 1 in Ottawa. The Liberals are doing a bit better. They have a decent chunk of Toronto, but other than a single seat in Mississauga and 2 in Ottawa, they have no seats in the rest of the province. They're rapidly becoming the Toronto party. The Greens are on the map. They have Guelph, Kitchener Centre. They're reasonably competitive in Parry Sound and Muskoka, but it's really hard to say how competitive they are. Now, I will note from my last forecast, I did do a few tweaks. Obviously, more polls came out. I have tweaked a little bit of the weightings because it looks like some of the riding polls from Main Street coming out that the NDP is doing a little better with their incumbents than the general average would suggest. So I've basically reduced the NDP strength in ridings they're not controlling, but have increased their relative weight in ridings they currently are incumbents in. So in other words, places like Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, the NDP are suppressed, but places like London, the NDP are elevated a little bit. Basically, I'm just concentrating the NDP vote share into smaller areas. That's not helping them, though. I've actually dramatically consolidated the NDP vote share. But when you're talking about 16.9%, which, keep in mind, they were about 23.27-ish last time, at least with forecasted to the current electorate that I'm expecting. So they're down nearly 7%. Sorry, 6%. A little over 6%. That's not a good show. And even in that, places like Parkdale, Highfield, or High Park, Ottawa Centre, Kiiwetinoong, and London Fanshawe are not safe ridings. So it would not be entirely implausible to see the NDP knocked down to, say, 3 seats. I think it's unlikely, but it is a thing that could, in principle, happen here. Meanwhile, the Liberals are doing a little better. But again, they're not doing great. Sorry for the dead air there. My train of thought is dead. Here we go. That's what I wanted to say. The Liberals really have no hope to do anything this election. What they're trying to do here, and what your goal would be if I was the campaign manager for Bonnie Crombie, is to try to cross 20 seats. Not because 20 seats means anything in particular, but if they could cross that threshold, they could firmly say, we are the center-left option. Come to us. A result like this at 7-13 doesn't really speak to that in any significant fashion. And there is the play that the Liberals could claw their way into, say, 20. It's not entirely impossible. Orleans, Kingston, Tobic Lakeshore, Humber River, parts of Scarborough, Willowdale? I think that's that riding. Right there, That is 6 ridings. Sorry, 7 ridings. That puts them 20. So it's definitely a possibility. But breaking into the GTA just doesn't really seem to be happening. Frankly, I think this Aaron Mills seat, which is Bonnie Crombie's seat, it might be overprojection on my part to be giving that to them. Because I'm giving Crombie a leadership bonus now that everything is settled out on who the candidates are. So I might have overpumped her, but we'll see. I will also note with Eagleton Lawrence, those of you who watched the last video know this is a big swing. That's because the NDP candidate dropped out of the riding, and I gave a small bump to the Liberal, or a bump to the Liberal candidate there, on the assumption that a bunch of the NDP voters will be voting for the OLP, since there's no NDP candidate there. I don't know if that is a good assumption, but it's an assumption I have made. So that could very well be a wrong call, but that is a call I have made. So that is kind of the situation we are in. But where does it look like it's going to trend to? And, well, that's not any better. It really does not look better. There really doesn't look to be a bright side if you're the opposition to Doug Ford here. He's firmly in first place. And yeah, the Liberals are gaining ground vote share. We can see this here. From like 24.5, 26.5, 27, 29. Not bad, all things considered. They're crawling up. But this vote share they're gaining is not very efficient. For example, they're gaining almost 7 points in Hamilton Niagara. Now, for those of you playing at home, I define Hamilton Niagara as like this part of the Golden Horseshoe. But they have no capacity to win a seat there, other than maybe snagging one of these Hamilton outskirts. But even those are not particularly close to them. So that's not ideal. Or you go, say, look at Eastern Ontario. They've gained 7 points there. But it's not an efficient 7 points that they're gaining. So they're actually losing seats because of that. Because of the way it's playing out with voters. Like which demographics they're getting and losing points in. Not ideal. They're getting 5 points in Central. Central being this vicinity. These writings. Again, not ideal. Because they're not anywhere close to winning a seat there. Places where they are doing a little better, or about average better, Toronto, they're actually able to gain seats, but they only gain about 5 points there, and they gain about 5 points province-wide, so they're not really doing better in Toronto, they're just doing better overall, and that's bumping Toronto. The real killer to the Crombie campaign is they're actually doing only 4 points better than the GTA, while doing almost 5 points better overall. So they're lagging behind in the GTA compared to the rest of the province. And they need to win the GTA to ever win a majority. Now, I think that's a little oversold when people talk about Canada as a whole. But when you're talking about Ontario specifically, and you're talking about an area that has 25 seats, we're talking about like Peel region, this part of the York and Durham regions over here, these ridings, those ones, obviously Newmarket, Aurora. You're talking about 25 seats. It's pretty hard to win an election in Ontario as a left-wing party if you cannot win any of the suburbs. Some of these are more closer to full-on urbs now, like Brampton and Mississauga are bigger than my home of Halifax, so that's almost more of an urb than a suburb, but you get the idea. If you're not able to win these cities and win in these regions, it's very difficult for the left to win in Ontario. The PCs, or any right-wing party, is going to dominate rural areas in 2025. That's pretty much guaranteed. So there's like 20, 30, 40 seats that the PCs or any replacement thereof would always win. Or in the case of this one riding, a PC former campaign manager ran as an independent and won. So that's the kind of deal here. So the left, the Liberals, the NDP. Sorry, my voice is a little off in this one. I have a little sore throat today. The left has to win not just Toronto, not just Ottawa over here. They need to win the GTA. There's no capacity for them to win an election otherwise. And what you're seeing here is they're not really running a campaign targeted at actually winning the GTA. The NDP doesn't even really seem to be winning a campaign targeted to holding the seats they currently hold. It's just an astoundingly bad campaigns being run in Ontario. Now, Ford is running a generic campaign. There's really nothing worth mentioning about it. If he was running as a really strong opponent, it'd be a bad campaign, but the Crombie Libs and the Style NDP are not strong opponents. They're pretty weak. They're really not offering anything. Or at least anything that voters care about, and particularly, again, voters in the GTA care about. And if you can't win those voters, there's no real path to win. Like, just a hypothetical example. You merge the NDP and the Liberals and the Greens together. It won't ever happen, by the way, but you did. Okay, now you're at 22 seats. Okay, you start picking up some of these low-hanging fruit ridings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. 23 seats right there. Now you're at 45. Ford is at 79. And what? You still need to break into the GTA because you're running out of seats that you can actually win elsewhere. It's possible a really strong, economically left-wing party might do better in Northern Ontario. Ones that aren't running weak campaigns like the NDP. But it's hard to outflank Ford on these issues that matter to unionized areas. Heavily manufacturing, heavily mining interest. It's hard to outflank Ford there. Because Ford does good on those issues. Those are one of the things he's actually strong with. That he actually makes substantive policy decisions and actions. And the unions back him for it. So, if you can't beat Ford chasing after the union vote, because the unions support Ford, and you can't beat Ford in the rural areas, because farmers and small town people just do not trust big city progressives. They never will. Your only hope is you're trying to do like an insurgent campaign like the Greens are in some rural areas where they really point out that Ford himself, in a lot of ways, is a big city guy and not a rural dude, such as with the Greenbelt stuff. And that could work, but you're not going to be able to generalize that to the Liberals or to the NDP, because the Liberals and the NDP are big city parties. Schreiner has an edge here because the Greens are smaller, they're less well known. He himself comes from a background of agricultural, and the Greens are more of a high level picture. They're a little more supportive to the kind of like agrarianism that a lot of rural Ontario wants, because a lot of rural Ontario is very farming heavy. Unsurprisingly, it's very fertile farmland. But again, you can't really generalize that to a full Liberal Party, to a full NDP. Not in 2025. So it's a really big indictment that these two parties are just floundering in the GTA. And I'll just point out here too, a lot of the growth experienced by the Libs is at the expense of the NDP. There's a little bit at the expense of the New Blues and other, but the PCs are also up. So, again, you're in this world where it's hard to beat Ford. This is not just the Liberals are a bad party, or the NDP are a bad party, or Styles is a bad leader, or Crombie is a bad leader. Styles is a bad leader, by the way, but that's not the main issue. You can tell she's a bad leader because 17%. There was a brief moment on social media where there was a few good polls in a row from Main Street in their daily tracking. And Ontario NDP voters were like, yeah, we're rallying, we're going to do this. And it's like, bro, you know you're cooked when going from 17 to 22 being still worse than the last election is a good moment for you. And then Main Street, that bump from Main Street's tracking disappeared because daily rolling polls are noisy. So looking at any particular day and being like, aha, trend is fraught with despair. Don't do that. The average is where you live and die. Do not look at individual polls. Unless they're my polls, then you should look at them. Don't do that. Averages are... You live and die by the average. I don't have an exact count here. I should have counted for this, but I didn't think to. But I think it's very safe to say Doug Ford, going forward after this cycle, when he finishes consolidating a lot of the union vote with this election, because don't make no mistake, Ford did not do this election on a whim, or because, aha, I could get reelected right now. He could have gotten reelected for the last 12 months. Could have had a snap election, won, it'd be fine. One of the reasons he's doing it right now is to consolidate the manufacturing union vote behind him. A lot of the anti-tariff, strong stance on America stuff is to shore up Ford's position in the manufacturing sector, particularly automotive. That's one of the reasons why he did this election. That's why he's proposing big bailouts if tariffs do happen. Those big bailouts are to back the manufacturing sector, because the thing you have to understand about big manufacturing is big manufacturing wants a more protectionist policy. Now, big mining, big oil, big farming, those want more free trade. They benefit from exports a lot, whereas manufacturing benefits from stopping competition. The people who run this stuff, they don't want that. Now, Ford doesn't want to, obviously, he can't, as a premier, do anything about actual trade policy. But being strong against American threats does actually play well with the manufacturing base. Now, you might just think, doesn't that contradict you, what you just said? Because, Trump's putting tariffs. Yes. But remember, as I just said, you can't, as Ford, as a premier, do tariffs or not do tariffs. What you can do is bail out subsidy, or not bail out, or not subsidy. There's two types of protectionism. There's active, with tariffs, and then there's passive, where you just stack the deck in favor of local producers. And that's through subsidies, that's through tax breaks, etc., etc. Ford can do that, and Ford is promising to do that in this election. To stack the deck in favor of Ontario manufacturing concerns. Now, will he actually do that if the tariffs don't go through? I don't know. And that's one of the things he's promised. That's one of the things he's running on. That's one of the purposes of his campaign. So going forward, Ford, as long as he's reasonably competent, has the rural vote, has the union vote. His only weakness is in a metaphysical sense, is like the herb suburby vote. Suburby vote because suburb voters are more swingy than other ones. Union voters don't swing very fast or very much. Rural voters don't swing very much at all. The more urban you get into this demographic, which is quite hilariously named by everybody, the promiscuous progressive. And they're the most swingy voter in existence. Now, suburbs are not this type of person, but suburban voters are much more sensitive to inflation, to the economy, and will move and vote accordingly. So metaphysically, Ford's biggest weakness is the suburbs, is the GTA, is the urbs, the big cities. Now, he's doing really good in those areas, so you might be like, well, what are you talking about, Bagel? What do you mean that's his biggest weakness? And it's his biggest weakness because he has to do proactive policy to win them over. That's why he was doing things against bike lanes. That was the idea behind the Greenbelt stuff. But the Greenbelt stuff was threatening his rural base, so he pulled back on it. Which is why he backed away. Because the rural vote matters more to him. In a math sense, not as a necessarily he cares about rural voters. But math-wise, it's better to have a locked-in rural vote than it is to have a locked-in city vote because rural voters swing less. However, what makes this an important distinction to make, and why I'm really stressing this here, about what Ford is strong with and what he's not, is the left is not picking up on this. And in fact, a lot of the things they're doing actually undermines them in the suburbs. Or in the... I don't want to keep saying suburbs because like Brampton, Mississauga and stuff, they're not suburbs, they're like cities, but they're 700,000 people kind of thing, so like in each of them, so they're quite large. But what you would want to do if you're tackling this is, now sometimes Crombie is like almost on the money with things like the middle class tax cuts he wants to do, like stuff like that would work. But one of the things suburbs are really skittish on is social issues, which is one of the reasons why Ford plays like really lukewarm social conservative. Just slightly, but not meaningfully, not intense, backs off pretty easily, because suburbs are skittish. And since he hasn't fully locked in the unions yet, he's working on that, and he probably will soon, he doesn't want to risk the suburbs. But the OLP and the NDP really haven't gone that menu. Now, Crombie's not like super hardcore social liberal, but a lot of the supporters of Crombie, a lot of the liberal base is like that. It's one of the reasons why I suspect someone like Nate Erskine Smith, the person who was the main opposition to Crombie in the Liberal leadership race, actually would have done worse than Crombie is, at least in vote percentage. He might win more seats because he might do better in the core Toronto ridings, maybe in Ottawa too. But in a lot of the more suburban areas, the GTA, to keep nailing that one on the head, I think he would have done pretty poorly. And because he's more considered on the progressive side of the Liberal Party, and that kind of stuff doesn't play super well in suburbs. Now you might say to yourself, oh, but how did the Liberals federally keep winning the suburbs? But the people like Aaron O'Toole and stuff, they're pretty moderate. They didn't win. Now, that is a great question. And the answer there is, really, O'Toole didn't actually offer voters anything to do anything different. There was no reason to vote for O'Toole over Trudeau. He didn't distinguish himself. and voters don't vote for someone who's similar. It's one of the reasons why Crombie and Stiles are not doing very well. They haven't distinguished themselves properly from Ford. And that's mostly a marketing thing. Not necessarily a policy thing. It's more marketing than policy. But Stiles and Crombie haven't distinguished themselves very well. At least in a good way. Any distinguishing they do hurts them. Because they're trying to, like, Stiles and Crombie will highlight, oh, we're very progressive. And it's like, that's not actually a good thing. You don't actually want to be that. And if you look at Scheer also does poorly in the GTA, but Scheer was perceived, rightly or wrongly, as a very likely to do something with social issues, and that scares suburbs. Now, and that it goes both ways, by the way. The left-wing stuff doesn't play well in the suburbs either. It's one of the reasons why you're likely going to see Brampton switch pretty hard. Like, that's why we saw Surrey switch pretty hard in BC recently. So liberal nor conservative social issues play very well in suburbs. They're very skittish. They don't like it. They want things to stay the same and the economy to be better. That's what the suburbs want. Rural voters want social issues. Union voters might be open to social issues, but suburban voters do not like them. City voters really like social issues. Bread and butter for urbanites. That's why you see the NDP and the Liberals not walk away from it, because they're currently fighting each other. It's one of the reasons why Doug Ford is winning right now. Is this isn't really... The Liberals aren't really running a campaign against Ford. And that's kind of the point I'm trying to make this election. Is if she was running a campaign against Ford, Crombie's a pathetic failure. This is a terrible campaign. She's running a campaign against the NDP. This actually is not a terrible campaign. She's running up the vote share with things like the tax cut policies and the GTA, knowing that she doesn't have to actually follow through with that because she won't win. So she doesn't have to worry about the budget being blown out or not with the other spending promises she's made. Basically, if you promise more spending but also cutting taxes, that doesn't work very well, usually. Unless you want to cut spending elsewhere, which Crombie hasn't, as far as I'm aware of, committed to cutting spending elsewhere. So, if you put that on the lens that she's running to defeat the NDP, to consolidate the left for 2029, this makes much more sense. In fact, it almost makes perfect sense. It makes total sense, really. Yeah, she's going to have a subpar election. She might not even win her own seat. But if she can make the Liberals the main opposition party, it'll be better for fundraising, it'll be better for volunteers, it'll be better for winning ridings. Now, don't make this mistake that a lot of people do. If you delete the NDP, that 17% is not going to vote Liberal. Now, I think you could safely say 50-60% will vote Liberal. Some of them will vote Ford. Some will vote Green. I'd say maybe 20% will vote Green and PC/Green. I'm not sure the ratio there, probably like 15-5, but hard to say. And then the other 20% will just probably leave the electorate. And overall turnout will decrease forever if the NDP didn't exist. So if they're at 17% right now, you would see like 3.4% exit the electorate. Something like 2% go Ford, 1 and a bit go Green, and then the remaining, give or take, 10% might go Liberal. Now, that would make elections a lot closer, a lot more competitive. There'd be a lot less swing ridings. Most of the 416 would go Liberal. Most of Ottawa would go Liberal. Some of these smaller cities that have changed a little bit, like Hamilton or like London, haven't swung as much yet, might be competitive. parts of this GTA would be in play, kind of thing. But it would not be an overwhelming position. Ford would still have the advantage because his core base, especially the NDP guys, would be union voters and rural. So a lot of ridings would be PC or bust, essentially. And only a very few would be liberal or bust. In a sense, you could probably say if the Liberals are... If Crombie does defeat the Ontario NDP, which I think is her campaign plan, Ford and the PCs will win more often than they lose, but it will not be like it is right now, where they just always win. Because there is really no capacity to oppose them. But on this one here, because my throat is sore and this is bothering me, if you like this, make sure you do your YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, comment below, and make sure you fill out my poll. I really appreciate all the people responding so far. With that, I bid you all adieu, and I'll see you next week with something else.